Welcome back, everybody, and pleased to have Professor Dave back. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So I saw this clip, and well, it's more than a clip; it's a video. But Alex O'Connor interviewed John Lennox, and John Lennox, he's from Ireland. He's from Northern Ireland specifically. He's a mathematician, and he's an apologist. I find him to be kind of a likable guy. He's a jolly, cheerful, polite dude, but he's kind of a doofus when he tries to do this apologetic stuff. And I was watching this, and something comes up in this, and I said, there's no way. And so I emailed Dave because I knew Dave would just absolutely love/hate this. And I want to bury the lead. I'm not going to tell the audience what it is. It'll come up later, and you're going to go,
actually,
oh, you got to be.
It's actually two things. It's two things that are exactly ripe for me to crap on.
Yeah.
But in general, it's like these guys, like I keep hearing, like everyone's like, religious people will be like, oh, you could never debunk John Lennox, or you could never debunk William Lane Craig, or like they have like these handful of like apologists that they think are like the smartest guys in the world. And then I'm always like, all right, let's say, and then I'm always just completely floored by how dumb they are. It's like, this is the guy that you're putting on a pedestal. Like, it's just, I don't know. It really shocks me every time.
Yeah, I mean, they're smart, they're well-spoken, but there isn't...
They're well-spoken.
There isn't
that's
substance.
Really the key. I don't...
Yeah, there's no substance behind what's being said, and we're gonna show you what we're talking about here. So I'll play this first clip from the interview. Unfortunately, it takes about 90 seconds for him to get his point across, but we'll pause when he gets through it, and then we'll react to what's being said.
As an argument against God, first of all, you've got to know that evolution is true, and you've got to define what it does. We need to distinguish between evolution and the origin of life. Now, Richard Dawkins, as you know, who's a brilliant writer, I must say, I remember reading his book, The Blind Watchmaker.
Yes.
And what arrested me in reading it, and I can almost quote it verbatim, so that's a compliment to Richard, that evolution, the blind automatic mechanism that Darwin discovered, is the explanation for the existence and the development of all of life.
He said that?
Yes, it's in the book.
Yeah.
And it took a very long time for him to realize that the first part of that statement is false.
Yes.
For a very simple reason. Because evolution, again, whatever it does or doesn't do, depends on the existence of life to do anything. So it cannot be the explanation for life. Now, of course, people these days get round that by talking about chemical evolution and so on. That's nothing to do with mutation and natural selection, and we could go into that. But as a mathematician, it's the former interests me more. That is the origin of life itself, because it's almost equivalent, though not quite, to the origin of information. I see there a huge problem.
Okay, well, that's what we're starting. There's a lot there to unpack, but I've got some notes, but go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, if you're going to use evolution to disprove God, literally nobody is doing that.
Yeah.
Nobody is going, evolution happens, therefore God isn't real. That's not a position that any serious person takes. And there are plenty of theists who accept science. But yeah, this whole, like, I love apologists that have no experience with chemistry, and in particular systems chemistry, talking about, oh, they can't explain that, and they get around it by by knowing what actually happens in that field. So yeah, sorry, molecules evolve by Darwinian means. RNA can evolve by Darwinian means. We have observed it many times in the lab, and he's wrong. So that's kind of it.
Yeah, so one of the things he said there is, Dawkins says in The Blind Watchmaker, I've read that book, that evolution is the explanation for the origin and existence of life. I spent about 2 hours going through this book. I couldn't find that quote in here. Maybe it's buried in here somewhere. Now, Lennox, I got Dawkins and Lennox mixed up there. Yeah. He says that now that idea can't be true because evolution depends on life. But we know that natural selection is something that applies to like inorganic chemical processes. That's been demonstrated in the lab.
Organic, but non-living. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Because organic can mean from life or contains carbon. My mistake there. Yeah, but like I went through, like I tried to find some relevant things in here. And, Dawkins says, does life violate the laws of physics? Because living, if you throw a rock, a parabola, the laws of physics describe its motion. But if you throw a bird, it'll start flying. And there's no equation in physics that describes that. So he talks about this. Does life violate physics? No, there's no reason to say that the laws of physics are violated for any living matter. And that would include the origin of any kind of living stuff.
But entropy.
That's, I don't know if Lennox doesn't use that argument, but that is definitely a very popular one. He goes on to say that, the folly of the logic here is to invoke a creator to explain the origin of DNA and protein machines by invoking a supernatural designer is to explain precisely nothing. Because if you're trying to explain something that's complex and you invoke something that's more complex, then you've just created.
That's obviously the enormous fallacy that they commit, but we don't even need to get into that. I mean, it's like, obviously, you're creating something even more complicated to try to explain the complicated thing. So that's idiotic, but we don't even have to talk about it because there's so much to talk about with the science. Like, again, Dawkins is, evolutionary biologist, that he doesn't know a lot about systems chemistry and probably didn't even bring it up in that book. I haven't read the book, but, and that's okay. It's not his field, right? But like systems chemistry is a field of study that has absolutely exploded in the last 20 years or so, 25 years. I think Gerald Joyce got the first self-replicating RNA strand, first autocatalytic ribozyme in like 2000, somewhere around 2000. And so obviously at first, different mechanisms, it wasn't polymerase activity at first, but it's a very, very rich field that Lennox knows absolutely nothing about. And it's okay that he doesn't know anything about it, but I'm sure that he must have at least heard, autocatalysis is a thing, right? Self-replicating ribozymes is a thing. And even if he doesn't really understand the chemistry of it, what exactly is going on mechanistically, you don't really have to, right? It's just, if you can accept that there are self-replicating things, then when you have changes and there's going to be replicative error, right? The sequence can't be copied infinite times with complete fidelity. There's going to be errors. If there are errors that enhance the survivability or the metabolic activity or whatever the thing is that it's doing, that will be favored and it will proliferate in a greater abundance, right? There'll be a statistically significant thing going on, and it's just basic statistical dynamics. Right? That's all it is. And again, we've been doing this in the lab for 20 years, so he needs to catch up a little bit.
Yeah, and there's, like you were saying, there is abiotic natural selection. And, like Richard Dawkins is extremely famous, but, he's not a chemist or anything like this. I've read one Origin of Life book by Nick Lane, I think his name is, called Transformer. And like it all went over my head, but this stuff does exist. It's just nowhere near as popular. But I mean, to what Lennox was saying, and this book was written in 1986, The Blind Watchmaker. It was a long time ago, but he does invoke the self-replicating molecules possibly arising. So Dawkins isn't saying that it's just life. He invokes this prebiotic kind of stuff. He does talk about RNA in here as well. And then the only thing, I was just kind of curious if you'd ever heard of this. Again, this was 40 years ago that this book was published just about. But he talks about a scientist named Cairns Smith who had an idea about clay crystals possibly being a catalyst for, the first self-replicating molecules. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and that's been demonstrated for decades as well. Right? Certain clay surfaces act as catalytic surfaces because the thing is, you need RNA in order to get the catalytic function of RNA. So how do you get RNA strands, right? Let's say you have nucleotides. How are those going to polymerize to make RNA? Apologists will often talk about, well, you need proteins, right? In our cells, nucleic acid formation is catalyzed by protein-based enzymes. And so if you don't have those, then how can you do it? Well, okay, there's other ways to do it, right? So there are these catalytic mineral surfaces, these different clays, Montmorillonite clay, that act as just this. It does heterogeneous catalysis, right? The nucleotides can approach, coordinate to the clay, and then they polymerize that way. And so this also has been demonstrated for decades. So that's a different step, right? You have these surfaces whereby random RNA sequences, right, RNA nucleotide sequences can be generated, right? The sequence isn't directed, but if you're getting trillions upon quadrillions of random sequences, you're going to have a certain proportion of those sequences that do something, that have a catalytic function. By chance, they are able to synthesize something. They're able to dimerize a particular amino acids, right? They're able to do that coupling. They're going to be able to do chemistry, and ribozymes are incredibly versatile in the types of chemistry that they can do. They're not as reliable as protein-based enzymes, but they played a part in the evolution of life very early on, because you get single-stranded RNA, and then number one, that acts as a template for its own polymerization, and then replication, rather, I should say, and then it does other stuff, right? It can do metabolic things, it can do whatever. So it's just none of these apologists are ever going to put in even an hour to learn about this stuff. That's why I make that's why I did my content debunking James tour. That's why I'm planning hopefully on doing like an Origin of Life series with tutorials, so I can explain all this stuff so everybody can learn about it if they want to,
Something you brought up there that even I have trouble keeping this like in the back of my head. When you invoked quadrillions of reactions, yeah, absolutely. I mean, a single cell will undergo something like 1 billion chemical reactions per second.
Yeah.
And how many cells would fit in a drop of water? It's just the amount of things happening here, and the amount of time for something, the amount of events and time for something to be selected that's favorable. Again, prebiotically, is that magnifies what you're talking about as a possibility so well.
Even if we're talking about 1 in a billion sequences having some important catalytic function, it's fine. We've got billions upon trillions upon quadrillions of iterations of this thing. That's what apologists can't seem to understand, is that when you have astronomical numbers of opportunities for something to happen, even something with infinitesimal odds becomes certain to occur. It's just competing infinities, So
yeah. Well, we'll get to, there'll be some of that later to bring up. The only other note I had there was what Lennox said is chemical evolution has nothing, I said it the way he says it, evolution has nothing to do with mutation and natural selection. Mutation maybe, but natural selection, no, that's not true. Natural selection plays on these systems, but we kind of covered that already, I guess.
But mutation too. I mean, we're talking about self-replication, and then it's not going to occur with 100% fidelity. And then mutagens too, I assume. I mean, I don't see why RNA wouldn't be privy to exogenous mutagens in the same way as DNA, right? Whether that's UV photons or whatever it is. It's going, the sequence that is self-replicating will change over time, and if it changes in such a way that it enhances its ability to self-replicate or do a particular thing, it will be more abundant statistically. It's basic logic. It's really,
especially because there'd be no nucleus shielding anything. So do you have a favorite candidate? Are you like a RNA world, amyloid world, metabolism first, or do you just kind of take it all
I
in?
guess RNA world, but the thing is that it's compatible. Like RNA world is somewhat compatible with metabolism first. Like it's not like one thing is happening only and then later another thing. Like there's all of these things that can be happening. I mean, in order for something resembling a protocell to develop, there has to be some kind of metabolic function. But the thing is that you have these polymers, you have RNA strands. The RNA strands are some of them have catalytic function. All of a sudden, you can be getting dipeptides, tripeptides, tetrapeptides. Those already also can exhibit catalytic function. They can do things too. You don't need a 200 mer of a protein to get some catalytic function. So I just think it's all happening in tandem. You have RNA strands, you have polypeptides that are developing, and it's a very messy process that probably took a very, very long time. Maybe not. Maybe it only took a couple thousand years, but maybe it took 100 million years of this mess of chemicals to just by chance find these correct functions to make something that resembles a rudimentary cell. I don't know.
Okay. Well said. All right. Next thing.
But staying with now the second part of Dawkins' assertion, it explains all the development of life. Now, here's where I think one has to be nuanced and to be fair, because Darwin was brilliant. He observed things that people had not observed. He observed changes.
Dead. Darwin.
Yeah.
For example, the famous
Dawkins.
study of the finch beaks in the Galapagos Islands. And I have a 1,000-page book at home, a famous book of that, and I've read most of it. And that was hailed as evidence. But of what? It certainly was evidence of cyclic change. What not so many people were aware of is that once the drought conditions disappeared, the proportion of long beaks to short beaks actually moved back to what it was before. But nevertheless, he could see that something was happening that filled niches and enabled existing creatures to adapt to new niches. Now, that seems to me to be uncontroversial because we can observe it. But when it goes beyond that to the creation, if I might use that word, of new life forms or all this kind of thing, I think that's a very different matter.
Okay, so, to me, that sounded like, I don't know how often you hear this trope, but I believe in adaptation.
Yes, but not macroevolution.
Well, not even that. It's, I believe in adaptation, not evolution. Seemed...
Tucker Carlson said that.
Yeah, I hear that all the time with the people online that I talk to.
How the fuck do you think the adaptation is happening?
I know. This is what I tell people.
Magic.
I wrote about it in my first book because that's one of the claims I go over. But I say adaptation is not a thing that happens. And I walk people through, like, how does an organism adapt? And we go through it and like, okay, so how do they have to change in some way. And so how do they acquire the change that allows them to adapt? By changes in their genes or in gene expression. Well, that's just evolution. So you just, you unironically prove.
That's why they're trying to bring back this Lamarckism angle, because people aren't understanding. No, this change doesn't happen within a generation, right? Organisms aren't just magically changing. But Lamarck said that they do, right? The giraffe is stretching his neck on purpose. And so that's what these people are thinking of when they think of adaptation. They're thinking of you and I could adapt to a new social environment and change the way we behave or something. It's that's not what evolution is. We're talking about multiple generations, mutations in natural selection.
Yeah,
but
I've never heard this thing about the finch beaks going back to being stabilized or something. But those were subspecies. The only way that they could contract, the beaks could contract to a less diverse distribution or whatever, would be in a species, not in all of the different species, because the ground finch and the cactus finch and whatever, they have completely different diets. So the drought isn't going to make the broadbeak finch all of a sudden have a... So I don't know what that was all about. I never really heard any of that.
But also it's I think a very dishonest thing that they do here, and Lennox himself didn't really fully do this, but obviously a lot of other apologists do, is they go oh, Darwin saw the different beaks. That doesn't prove anything. God could have just made them with the different beaks. It's yeah, you're right. But the point is that he got an idea and said, okay, it looks like this feature has been molded according to the environment and the food sources that are available. What if I can offer, what if I can take some plants or some kind of organisms and have my own environmental input, my own stimulus, and see if I can generate some kind of observe this kind of thing that I'm hypothesizing can happen. And I think that apologists don't understand, like, that Darwin did empirical science. I just did a debunk of this stupid pseudo-archaeology troll, and he was like, Darwin wasn't empirical. He didn't do it. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? It wasn't empirical. Like, empirical science is just mountains and mountains of experiments and observations. And he did all this science. He did a lot of science, So
I get people that are pushing the idea that in evolution, you propose that there would be missing links, right? And then you dig up the missing links. They call that circular reasoning. They say you're just begging the question. I was like, empirics is not begging the question. It's not circular reasoning. Yeah. People either
made a prediction and I was vindicated.
Yeah, they act as if we've always had all of the evidence and then we formulated a story to tell it. It's like, no. Right. But even when you tell them that we later found the evidence, they call that question begging. And that is just maddening.
Or they just say it's not real, right? It's,
they invoke the 2 times that a hoax happened, and therefore everything is a hoax.
Yes, Piltdown Man. Therefore, there are no.
Therefore, there are no missing links of anything. Yeah,
it's fucking bananas. Or if it's there, then Satan put it there.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Okay, and now this is the part that you've all been waiting for. You just don't know it yet.
I have a huge difficulty with that kind of what we may call macroevolution. But much more interestingly is what has happened in the last few years with so-called systems biology, where the Darwinian mechanism, well, natural selection was his, mutation was later. But if we put both together and we have the neo-Darwinian hypothesis, that has been called into very deep question as being totally inadequate. Mm-hmm. Here in Oxford, Dennis Noble.
There it is. Dennis Noble. All right, there's a little more here, but that's it.
One of the most fascinating characters, fellow of the Royal Society, and he's debated Richard on a number of occasions. And his argument is really in the end that natural selection, that neo-Darwinian thesis, doesn't need to be modified. It needs to be replaced because it's completely inadequate.
Okay, there we go. So let's, for the moment, just sort of not exactly skip Dennis Noble, but is Lennox even representing Noble correctly? Has Noble been saying that Darwinian evolution just needs to be completely replaced?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I don't think Noble denies the concept of natural selection. No, he just has this whole grift about pretending that it's basically epigenetic inheritance, that he's pretending that is more relevant than what we already understand about evolutionary biology, which is not true. And I made a pretty long piece going through all that I put out last week, I believe it was. And it's just like, this is all that apologists have, is they can they'll go like, oh, Dennis Noble had a conversation with Richard Dawkins in front of people. Therefore, the status of evolutionary biology is in flux. It's like, no, that's not like evolutionary biologists kind of don't know who Dennis Noble is and don't care. He doesn't publish in evolutionary biology journals. He's got a little bit of a James Tour thing going on, commenting on a field that he doesn't really understand and disparaging it. He's just not quite as toxic, let's say, about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, he doesn't. He very, very clearly doesn't understand certain aspects of evolutionary biology. He pretends that the central dogma has been violated, which it's very unfortunate that Crick called it a dogma. I don't know why he did that. But I don't know. If anyone's interested, I have a pretty long piece just really tearing through all the primary claims of Dennis Noble and showing that he has no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah, and even if the modern synthesis were to be replaced, it would still be replaced by something that invokes essentially Darwinian evolution, just with extra steps. So it's I don't know why an apologist would try to use this. I really don't.
Because it's just a narrative, right?
Yeah.
Science is bad, and a guy proved science wrong, and we worship him now. It's just a story. It's just point at Dennis Noble and think that that's like a win somehow, even though none of these. I mean, Lennox is smarter than the people who follow him, and he couldn't even dare try to talk about any of this, anything about evolutionary biology. He just sits there and goes, "Oh, macroevolution. I have a big problem with it." All right, man. Like, I guess a leaky faucet can fill up a bucket, but not a swimming pool, right? It's like the microevolution, macroevolution distinction already is invalid. But yeah, Noble. This is just their guy that they're pointing to now. That's it.
It's for Lennox. It's bizarre too, because I can't imagine he's a young Earth creationist, and so I don't get how you can think Earth and life are billions of years old, but evolution doesn't happen. You'd have to believe in that really crazy, archaic idea of special creation in different epochs. But that would mean that would predict that nothing would be related. There certainly wouldn't be predictable hierarchies of the relationships, but that's exactly what we see. So I'd like to hear how it's supposed to work if life and everything is billions of years old. Why is evolution called into such question? I don't know that, and we won't hear it here, I guess.
I think part of the problem is that apologists and certainly their followers have no grasp of the number and variety of specimens that are known. All of those lineages, paleontological lineages that have been filled in over the past 150 years or whatever, and they just don't even know about it, right? You could Google like whale evolution or whatever and get a bunch of intermediary species that are very well known, very Pakicetus and all these different ones, and they just don't know that. They just don't know that we have these specimens and that they very clearly represent this transition from land to aquatic mammals. It's just a combination of ignorance and then an unwillingness to accept these facts that they don't look for.
Yeah, it's just there. I feel like it would be weird if he'd never thought about it before, because he seems like a smart guy. But if you think life is billions of years old, but evolution doesn't happen, then you would think that humans have been around for billions of years. Or you would think that if you believe humans were specially created, which I'm pretty sure he does, but you'd have to think all the other life was around for billions of years and just didn't change at all, which is just so obviously and stupidly wrong.
Yeah. I mean, artificial selection shows us how much things can change, obviously on a hyper rapid time frame, because we're using sentience to guide it. But we can easily show how much things can change, right? Especially crops and stuff like that. So it's like we've shown how much change is possible and on what time frame. So if life is around for this astronomical time frame, like, I mean, it's just this whole like, oh, we accept the little bit of microevolution that we can see in artificial selection and stuff like that, but I don't understand how we can get from this particular life form to this seemingly completely different life form, which is fine. It is something that you have to like learn and wrap your head around, but just do that. Like learn about genetics and learn about embryonic development and learn about what is possible when you have certain mutations and what that does to a developing organism and how that can generate very, very significant phenotypic change over time.
Yeah, I like that. Just do it. Somebody should trademark that.
Yeah,
that'd be a good one. All right.
The problem is, and it's a chicken the egg problem, that most simply perhaps can be realized. Here is DNA. You can't get DNA without a cell. You can't get a living cell without DNA. So how does that work?
Magnets, how do they work?
Yeah. So where substantiate that for me, Lennox. You can't get DNA without a cell. Why? I mean, you can't get a cell, or no, actually, that one makes a little more sense. You can't get a cell without DNA.
Yeah,
That's the
that's
one that's
fine.
truly Truly, there's no basis for that. And in fact, we're extremely confident that the first cells had no DNA, right? It was life first and then DNA afterwards. We got an upgrade when it shifted to DNA.
Yeah. I mean, we already know that you can have a virus with DNA in it. You don't have to have a cell.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, good
and
point.
and really the DNA makes the DNA hijacks a living cell and makes the virus, but we do have a case of the DNA actually produces the virus. Now, that wouldn't have happened the way it happens today, billions of years ago, if a viral first world is what happened. There's compelling reasons. Yeah, I mean, there's compelling arguments for it. Things like mimiviruses have an actual metabolism, and maybe viruses have just devolved almost in a way. They've just reduced to being essentially today abiotic, DNA machines.
Yeah.
But it started out
the
that
presence of hosts. That does make sense, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's no logical or scientific problem with the idea of, it doesn't even have to be viruses, but that you can't have DNA without a cell. That's just not the case.
Yeah.
And
both of those two statements are demonstrably false. I'm sorry, John.
Yeah. And whatever the first form of life was, almost certainly, I mean, I'm tempted to say it wouldn't have been cellular. It maybe could have been, the phospholipids, they can spontaneously form a bubble and it would have captured. But I can envision that the first real living thing was literally just an environment of chemicals that just perpetuated their own existence, I guess. They were autocatalytic. And then eventually they were captured by phospholipids around hydrothermal vents, for example.
Well, I mean, it needs a boundary, right, in order to be labeled as an organism. But the thing is that is that's not a problem, right? Because we don't need a phospholipid bilayer. This is another thing that apologists like Tor do all the time, is like, look at what we have now. We have DNA now. Cells have phospholipid bilayers now. It could be a fatty acid monolayer. Like there are many ways to get lipids to create vesicles to encapsulate molecules that are doing chemistry. I think that the first thing that you would call life has to have that boundary. A protocell has to have some kind of boundary, but it doesn't have to be a phospholipid bilayer. All of these things can be complexified over time,
All right. Next thing here.
The DNA molecule was not simply complex, it was linguistically complex. That is, it gave us a 3.4 billion letter long word in a chemical alphabet. And all those letters had to be in the right order. That is a stupendous level of complexity, which has no chance of being generated by random processes. And Richard Dawkins agrees with that. He brings in something that the natural selection actually has a different kind of operation, but we're not going to that at the moment.
So, the sort of inevitable straw man of evolution, the whole, it's all just random processes, and that could never do anything. So all the letters have to be in the correct order or it doesn't work. Well, that's just false.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, even identical twins don't have truly point for point identical genomes.
Right. Apart from the zygote. Yeah.
Yeah.
The moment they differentiate, mutations begin occurring. Yeah, no, this is just, they do this every time, right? I mean, first of all, this putting this concept of information on pestle. Look, if you have a mechanism by which nucleic acids form, they're going to have some sequence, and whatever sequence it has is the sequence it has, right? Then function evolves, right, over time. And so they do this for nucleic acids, and they do this for proteins too. Obviously, with a protein, they're like, look at this 200 residue protein. If it was any different at all, it wouldn't work. So it's a 1 and a blah, 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 10 to the whatever, and there hasn't been enough time in the universe, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
It's like, dude, you really think that every single, that exact sequence has to be exactly that in order for that protein to have that function? Okay, you don't know anything about proteins then, right?
Yeah.
It's just, they don't, this they're pretending everything has to be this exact perfect way, and it just doesn't. I don't know.
Yeah, if a protein has 20 amino acids, then it would be, or 100 amino acids. And since there are 20 amino acids, it's 20 to the power of 100, and there isn't enough time. And it's just like, the one part about that's just so stupid to me is you don't know all of the permutations of amino acid sequences that can make some form of life work. Life today, the way exactly the life we see today and its exact protein sequences, sure, you can maybe say that those are the odds, but that's like saying, the famous 52 factorial, how many different ways you can arrange a deck of cards. Does it mean that if I have a deck of cards, it
can't exist?
It can't exist, or it must, or God must have shuffled that deck, because the odds of that arrangement are 1 over 52 factorial. It's like, but it could have been any other way and still have worked. Now, we're not dishonest enough to say that any protein can be in any amino acid sequence and be functional. We're not that dishonest.
It's astronomical that change any leucine to isoleucine. You think that that's going to render the protein non-functional? No, there's tremendous variance at every single amino acid residue, except maybe a handful in the active site. Right? There may be 2 or 3 critical residues in the protein. That's about it. The rest is it's just, if there's a hydrophobic one here and change it to a different hydrophobic one, that's not going to change anything about the protein. It just won't, and so this huge number becomes a much smaller number immediately when you have that realization.
And then the other thing he was saying is he invokes nothing but random processes. What I would assume is invoking the mutation aspect of it, and then just completely negates that natural selection happens, that there is a selective mechanism. But what's actually really interesting is this, because what he said is there's no chance of it being produced by random processes. There's this YouTube video or channel called Code Bullet. It's a cool YouTube channel. He makes codes to program something to do something crazy. And I watched one just yesterday or 2 days ago, and he was programming something to play Minesweeper and win. And the way he initially programmed it was he just had the mouse click randomly over and over again. And whenever he would die, it would just restart. And he was able to win games of Minesweeper by doing that. And then all he did was, after going through that, now it took an extremely long, it took a huge number of plays to finally win, but it is possible. And so then what he did was he just inserted a very rudimentary extra bit of information in there, or in other words, a selective process. And it was just, if you see these numbers around where you click, then he just programmed a very simple way to try to increase the odds of winning.
Yeah.
It was very little information that he added, but that astronomically increased the rate at which he was able to win. And we go back to what you were saying earlier. We have quadrillions of molecules in every cubic centimeter of seawater in this prebiotic world, engaging in all these things, and selection can happen. And it's just chemistry, but chemistry goes by laws too. It's trying to reduce energy or be in a lower energy state, for example. So
the dissipating the free energy gradients drives the complexification. That Eigen paper that I talked about. But so it's two things. It's denying all of the things that you just said. It's denying all of the prebiotic chemistry that can happen. But then it's also presenting what's around today as though that has to be the target of abiogenesis, right? So he's like 3.4 billion base pairs. It's like, first of all, abiogenesis didn't produce DNA at all. But second of all, I assume he's talking about the human genome. Is that how many base pairs are in the human genome, roughly? Yeah. So he's pretending that that nature had to randomly assemble the human genome.
Yes.
Right? What is a bigger straw man than that? Homo sapiens evolved something like, let's say, 3 billion years at least after the abiogenesis event.
into the process.
What are you talking about, man? Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's like you think the eye just randomly appeared one day? No, I think it gradually appeared over hundreds of millions of years.
And there are organisms alive today that have so many different iterations of complexity of light sensitive organs, right? There are organisms that have just a bundle of photoreceptor cells. Guess what? That's what happens first, and then other structures evolve that enhance the ability to work with that input. And yeah.
Okay, moving on.
With the more recent discoveries of the nature of the living cell and all the chemical factories in it, there are levels upon levels of complexity beyond the genome, and that just beggars into unbelief, the possibility that any known mechanism can produce that without the input of intelligence.
Somebody's talking about James Tour's interactome.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what he's even talking about, but
he's talking about the interactome that James Tour talks about.
Well, so I've never heard of that either.
All hang out, right? Tour and Lennox have had talks and stuff. See, this is the problem. You get this network of apologists that don't actually know what they're talking about, and then they just reference each other. Dennis Noble said that that neo-Darwinism is dead, so it is. James Tour said that the interactome means abiogenesis is impossible, so it is. They just reference each other. None of them have any idea what they're talking about. It's the funniest thing in the world.
I got to do a quick tangent here because I was going to ask you this earlier and I forgot. I'm sure you've seen, because it's absolutely everywhere, the meme that you've created of, according to Dennis Noble is Dennis Noble.
Oh, yeah.
And that, because that came out from your edit of Subwergis saying Dennis Noble over and over again. And like, as someone who's edited like thousands of videos as well, you just sometimes part of the next thing accidentally slips in there, and so it just comes through funny. But like you've seen that, right?
I've definitely seen a lot of. I mean, on my Dennis Noble video, half the comments are some version of Dennis Noble. So,
yeah, but it's so funny because your initial thing, when you splice them together, he ends up saying, according to Dennis Noble is Dennis Noble. And it's just
pearl of wisdom so there.
Yeah.
The illustrious Noble. Yeah. I noticed that Sabor has pivoted he's doing a lot of like political content now, talking about like Pakistan and Indian stuff. I think he's trying to be like, all right, I've failed as a commenter on biology, so let's maybe do something else.
There's a pretty infamous flat earther, Flatzoid. He's now just doing religious debunking or religious stuff because of how horrible the final experiment went for him and others. Anyways, getting back to what we're doing here. All I heard there from Lennox, the possibility that any known mechanism can do that without the input of intelligence. This is just an argument from ignorance.
I don't get it, so it can't happen.
Yeah.
That's it.
Or I don't know, therefore God, and you don't know either.
Yep.
And I mean, if we just apply some reasoning, we can ask the question, well, what do you think is actually more likely, an as of yet undiscovered naturalistic phenomena or mechanism or magic? Well, we know that the former has happened historically over and over again. We don't know that the latter is even something that our universe has. Magic is not a known property of the universe.
And in this case, there's nothing unknown either. He's just talking about the way proteins interact with each other in the cell. It's like, all right, man, like just learn about how they interact. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, he's literally like James Tour thinks it's a problem, so Lennox is repeating that. That's all it is.
Well, if James Tour says it, then it has to be true.
It's
all right.
True, yeah.
So this is the part where it starts to get weird.
Does that suspicion go to that depth of evolution? I mean, like, do you think that there is reason to doubt that I share a common ancestor with a chimpanzee?
Well, you and I are biologists, and there's desperate need in the world for some kind of grain that resists, let's say, floods and so on and so forth.
He's telling a hypothetical story for everybody here, because I did chop pieces of this up because it takes him forever to get to the point.
Yeah. And we sit in the laboratory and we genetically engineer a new type of wheat that's very successful. 1,000 years hence, people are investigating the archaeology of this, and they're trying to determine what is related to what. Now, they know nothing about us or what we did. And their research, if it's done on the basis of a dominant naturalism, will completely miss the fact that there was an intelligent input at one point creating this new level. My faith in God doesn't depend on whether there's a common ancestor or not. Certainly God could do it that way, but I'm not convinced that he has.
So, yeah, this is, I don't know. It's kind of, it's weird. So he tells the story that, you know, his analogy is basically to say, well, if God made it that way, like either guided evolution, which he didn't commit to saying really anything specific, but could God have guided evolution to get to the way it is today or something else? Well, we'd never be able to know because the science would make it look like we're related to the chimpanzees, when in reality, God, like an alien manipulating our DNA, it's like Scientology in a weird sort of way, what he's describing.
Yeah, or more of like a guided evolution, like like a Discovery Institute kind of a thing, like God the Tinkerer that has to kind of keep coming in and like, oh, this isn't cool enough. I'm going to do something here so that I can get the next cool thing. I don't really know. I mean, yeah, it's like he's saying, okay, somebody in the future couldn't tell that something was genetically engineered rather than coming about naturally. Okay, maybe, I don't know. Maybe they would be able to figure it out. But based on archaeological evidence, right? If you know like what humans were capable of doing, then I think you can put two and two together. But a couple of things. Number one, there were no humans doing genetic engineering 50 million years ago, so we can rule that out as an explanation for what went on, in other eras, in other eons. So the only other answer is God. And so, yeah, to me, it sounds like he is saying that if we are to accept this long geological time, that there must have been a God that comes in and goes, okay, I'm going to change this so that I can get that. Okay, and my answer to that is just like, well, which, or give me a species, give me an organism, give me a lineage, give me something that you think cannot be adequately explained by standard evolutionary principles. Right? Give me an example. I don't know what that would be.
See, to me, it's even weaker than that, because he's just saying that God could have done these things and then future scientists would be unable to know. Well, let me grant you that. And then Lennox, let's have you grant the naturalistic explanation, the purely naturalistic explanation. And what we end up with is those two the two stories there are indistinguishable from each other. So you haven't explained anything in particular. And then it's very odd how in the end he says, I'm not convinced of it. But you just told us that the other possibility would look identical to the traditional secular scientific account. So what have you not been convinced by, if by your own admission that's what it would look like?
Yeah, like if you start to accept more and more of a naturalistic explanation, but just keep shrinking the role of the deity down to the point where you're like, okay, there was a point mutation that happened, and it's because God went, wiggled his nose and made the point mutation happen. It's like, all right, well, we know exactly how that can happen naturally. So what is the purpose of this additional layer? Like this, God becomes more and more superfluous the more you learn about these naturalistic mechanisms. And so it's like, look, the God that scientists can believe in is a God that created the universe and just knew, it encoded within it somehow all of these naturalistic mechanisms that spell out all of the science that we know today, right? So there can be a deity that went like this and then knew all of these evolutionary processes that were going to unfold over billions of years, right? It's a God that's compatible with all of the science that we know. So if you believe in that God, that's fine. But this tinkerer God is just really, really funny to me. He's just a loser. He's a really lame God. It's like, oh, it's not good enough. I'm gonna make it better now. It's like, come on, man.
Yeah, you can't be omnipotent if that's how you're going about doing things.
Yeah.
The other thing, this isn't really what Lennox is doing, but this kind of thing is very adjacent to this. When you just simply retreat to, well, yeah, but God could have done it that way. Yes, but you will make that excuse no matter what we learn. No matter what things are like or could have been like, that's what you invoke. And so what you end up with here is an explanation, the God hypothesis or whatever, that explains anything that ever could be. The problem with that is an idea that explains literally everything explains nothing in particular.
Right.
And I have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the part where, okay, so I had to put this disclaimer because this is so bizarre. So I'm skipping over a part of this because it goes on forever. But what Lennox says is that he finds the fact that it says, and God said, and the word multiple times throughout the Bible, especially in creation. He says to Lennox, that's evidence that what the Bible's trying to tell us is how all this linguistic complexity that he brought up earlier, that he sees in nature, came to be. So that's I'm front loading with that because it takes 5 minutes for Lennox to get it out. But with that in mind, listen to whatever this is.
That lots of things in our universe are mathematically describable. That is, we can use the language of mathematics to describe them. Mm-hmm. And that is so amazing. We discover that in biology, life is a word-based phenomenon as well. And information bearing macromolecule, DNA. So at the heart of the two sides, physics and biology, it's word-based. And that resonates very much with me. In the beginning was the Word.
Okay. No. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, I hear this thing about DNA being a language all the time. That's Ken Ham's favorite way to talk about it and all this stuff, but you go on.
So the first part is true, right? There are mathematical relationships that are inherent in the universe, right? Gravitational stuff, whatever, all, the inverse square laws and everything like that. That's true. That's not words. Right. We have a language of mathematics to describe these relationships. We invent symbols and sounds to communicate these ideas. The universe doesn't have little equations floating around in space. Right. So that's not words. And as you just said, DNA also is not words. Right. There's 4 bases and they come together in various combinations. That's it. He's really got nothing here.
Yeah, what he specifically said, life is a word-based phenomenon. And I like the way you were putting that, you describe there are laws of physics that govern the universe that we know about, but it's sort of, it's kind of like the, how do you want to put it? It's almost like what people do when they invoke fine-tuning, but like, look, if the universe were finely tuned and we exist in it, the only conclusion we could possibly make by doing observations is that it's finely tuned to be observed. But you're just kind of begging the question there. That's a puddle thinking the pothole was made for it. No, a puddle will always be shaped for its pothole. But this thing here, if there are laws of physics that govern it, and then we can observe them, then it literally can't be any other way that they get described by intelligent things that talk and use symbols and mathematics. So it literally can't be any other way. So calling it linguistic is to invoke, like you said, that there are these linguistics and laws and numbers out there, and we pluck them, and then things, like we pluck them out of the ether, and then things begin to be known. It's like, no, that's literally the opposite of how it happens. They exist, we observe them, we have conventions for describing them.
Yeah. He's anthropomorphizing the universe, right? We have language, therefore the universe has language, or we have language, therefore our deity has language. It's the deity did not, he's trying to pretend that language predates life, right?
Silly, quite silly. I think it's Dawkins who said this. He calls this phenomena something like the tyranny of the discontinuous mind, or something like that. And it's his way of saying that we anthropomorphize everything because we can't help but do it. We think we're special, and then if you think the universe revolves around you, then you're going to think the reason I can know and do and see and explain things is because I was supposed to do that. It's like, no.
Yeah.
If you could do it, then it would be sort of inevitable that it would look like that, but that's not the case.
And there's an evolutionary impetus for that, but we should recognize that and just go, okay, that's like sort of an artifact in my lizard brain. Let's proceed with that knowledge.
Yeah, the ability to construct a mental model of your surroundings is totally compatible with evolution. It absolutely is.
It's like it's like random things looking like faces to us. We recognize faces. We hyperinflate our importance and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a great quote about that. That seems really simple, but it's actually pretty deep, and it gets right at the core of what you and I were just talking about. We see faces in the clouds all the time. You never see clouds in faces. Nobody ever does that because you're hardwired. You're trained to see the patterns that are biased toward you. In this case, I mean like the human species. So a cloud can look like a face because you want it to in a weird sort of way. But if clouds can look like faces, then faces have to look like clouds. But they don't. I mean, they absolutely never do.
Unless you're on a shit ton of acid.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, these are the things that we're hardwired to recognize. We're looking for faces. We want to see faces. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, just a couple more things here from Mr. Lennox.
God started biology according to the Bible. He told human beings to name the animals. And taxonomy is the basic intellectual discipline, naming things in all disciplines. We use taxonomy. And God wasn't going to do it for them. He said, you go and do it. So God is for biology, you see. And that is a mandate to my mind, that we are left to have the interest, fascination, and enjoyment of finding out a great deal about the world ourselves. But the Bible does make this steering comment that says it's a word-based universe. And what I say is that science has come up for the evidence for that.
Cool story, bro.
Yeah, kind of the classic science is just the way we discover God's creation. And that's, when people say that, I don't tend to try to debunk them normally. It's like, well, if you think that, sounds like you kind of think science is awesome, so like, good for you. But this idea...
But it's also these assertions that like, oh, I'm really interested in learning. No, you're not. You have been learning about all this crap that you're saying, so you can actually understand it.
That's a good point.
Sorry, continue.
But this God started biology. So what is your take on how would you describe classification? Because I say, like, there's a lot of subjectivity to it. The genetic relationships between organisms is absolutely objective. That's not subjective. But the way we create these categories kind of is. So it's kind of an art form. So like this thing that God started biology by Adam naming the animals, like a biologist wouldn't make an argument like that.
I mean, the way that we demarcate and classify is arbitrary, to a certain extent, anyway. I don't know.
I've had this really funny thought. I've never told anybody this before, but you know how like cladistically humans are fish?
Yeah.
So I've always thought, we have all the different animal phyla today, birds, reptiles, mammals, amphibians, fish, whatever. But if...
That's all one phylum. That's all chordata.
Oh, yeah, sorry. The classes of the animals. My mistake. Thank you. But if somehow intelligent life was around 400 million years ago and started classifying, then we wouldn't call them birds, amphibians, reptiles, mammals. We'd call them flying fish and hairy fish and scaly fish and what would you call an amphibian? A land fish, a slime fish. So I think that's just kind of a funny thing. Like if we had existed in some different era of time, yes, our classification system would look completely different, and that's why it's kind of an art form and there's some subjectivity to it. But again, the genetics is absolutely objective.
Nature doesn't care what a phylum is or a class or an order or a genus or anything like that. But the lineages obviously are, it cares what a species is in the sense of, interfertility. But beyond that, not really. And yeah, what you said is true. Like we began categorizing life in the distant past recently, so we view it from this lens of the present day. But that's also why all these different breeds of dogs, like at some point we're going to have to be calling them different subspecies and stuff. Like people in the future that would look back at dogs that exist today and be like, these can't possibly all be the same species. That's crazy. We have to start subdividing these,
Another thing I've thought about, my candidate for like a type of animal that will at some point in the future get we distinguish birds and reptiles, even though birds are dinosaurs, but we distinguish them completely as something different. I think the penguin, it'll be a huge amount of time, but I think the penguin will be that because it's a bird, but it's aquatic and can't fly. It just lives so differently than every other kind of bird that, to me, that's the species where in like 50 million years, eventually they're going to say, we're not going to call this bird anymore. We're going to call this something else, but I don't know.
Totally. What. Yeah. Just like we're not fish, right? We're lobe-finned fish, but we're not fish also. Yeah.
Maybe your grandpa was a fish, but all right. This is the last one here.
And that's my big problem with the naturalistic worldview. There's no believable generator of word-like information that any of us know about. It always is associated in our experience, at least, with a human intelligence.
Pretty short, but there you go. Do you have anything really to remark on that?
Words are only associated with human intelligence because we make words. That's all it is. A couple other species are capable of, sign language and stuff like that. So not just humans. But DNA is not words. Sorry. You have nucleotides that polymerize in some sequence. That's not a word.
Yeah, what I tend to see, I think this is probably what Lennox was getting at. But what people say is DNA contains information. How could that possibly happen? It must have been from God. And what I say to that is, look, DNA is literally just a molecule. Like, it's a pretty cool one. I like it. But it's literally just a molecule. And any molecule has information. In fact, we can be so reductive that we can go to the level of the atom and say that its valence electrons contain information. But nobody ever invokes that atoms have electrons as requiring a designer to be the explanation for it. But if there's information all the way down at the system, then of course there's information at higher levels of the system as it organizes into that complexity. And that just really blows up their whole talking point, because they're trying to say that DNA can't, like, it contains information and nothing else does, because they don't think about these things deeply.
Right.
Therefore, that couldn't have happened naturalistically. It's like, no, I can get you to concede that there's information all the way down. Yeah. But that's just what we call it, too.
Yeah, a system of gaseous particles. Each particle has a position and momentum, right? That's information. No, it's just that people they want to think of information as like this substance, this like ethereal substance that permeates the DNA strand. It's just a sequence of nucleotides, right? They just don't understand basic molecular biology. Like, that's all it is. And I'll give them that it's very incredible. Like, the human genome has these 46 chromosomes that total up to 3.4 billion, whatever base pairs he said. I don't know what the number is. That's big, right? That's a lot of base pairs, right? But we're talking about 3 billion years, or at least 2 billion years of that we can go back and understand from from single cellular unicellular life that resembles, let's say, bacteria, kind of like that. We're talking about just so much time and so much complexification, iterative complexification, right? Nature did not produce the human genome out of thin air. That never happened. It didn't even produce DNA at all out of thin air. It produced RNA strands, the single-stranded nucleic acid, by polymerized nucleotides, ribonucleotides polymerizing on hot clay.
Yeah.
Right? Start there. Understand that first. Then ask what happened after that. And they're very good questions, right? I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we know exactly what happened to get the first protocell, but start where it actually started and talk about the real thing instead of pretending nature had to make the human genome from out of thin air in order to substantiate a naturalistic worldview. It's insane.
Yeah, there's information in the DNA, therefore there's a designer. It reminds me of the whole quantum mechanics. Well, that means that consciousness is fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, quantum mechanics proves God created the universe or something.
Yeah, that's another angle some of these guys take. Yeah,
I'm not qualified to say anything about that, but I suppose.
Well, I had a quantum mysticism is stupid debunk that I did actually quite a while now, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, something like that. But definitely talk about it all stems from misrepresentations of like double slit experiment and stuff like that.
Yeah. You'd think one day you and I are going to run out of things to address, but sadly,
we will not.
Sadly, we will not.
I'm drowning in it over here. People have been really way more often than they used to sending me things that they want me to debunk. And more of them these days have been something where I'm like, yes, I should do that. So I've been trying to pump out 1 or 2 of these things a week just because there's so many such and such goes on, such and such. Like right now, today I'm wrapping up Eric Weinstein and Sean Carroll and Piers Morgan.
That was great.
Oh, it was so satisfying. I was like, you guys are right. I have to, like, 30 people were like, please do this, please do this. I was like, this is hilarious, I'm going to do this. But it's just, there's so much to talk about. We'll never run out. Yeah,
it's a good business model, but I weep for humanity because of it.
I do too. Yeah, every day.
Anything else to close out?
No, yeah, John Lennox had never really talked about him at all, so good to a little bit of mock him a little bit in just a reaction format here. Maybe I'll hit him again some other way.
Maybe, yeah. Hopefully, I hope you don't have to, but can't be that optimistic. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks.